Prostate problems is one of the most frequent problems that men have when we age. In fact, up to 90% of 90-year-old men have an enlarged prostate. For this reason, in this video we are going to see what we can do at the level of nutrition, at the level of supplementation, how to prevent the growth of the prostate, how to avoid having an enlarged prostate, and also, how to reduce the symptoms if we only have the growth of the prostate throughout life. It brings problems in our quality of life, it brings symptoms that we do not want to have, and it is one of the things that makes us feel older. The prostate is actually a male gland that we have below the bladder and surrounds the urethra. This is logically a problem, because when it grows in size, most of the symptoms depend on that relationship it has with the bladder. Our urethra can compress your bladder, it can make it difficult for you to pass urine, and it can cause you many symptoms. But basically the function and location of this gland are what determine what symptoms its enlargement can give me. For example, the growth of the prostate can cause me to compress the bladder and make me feel urgent to go to urinate or make some, for example, urinate more frequently because we never completely empty the bladder. But we have other symptoms such as the desire to urinate and not being able to urinate effectively, getting up at night several times to go to the bathroom or passing urine slowly and with little power. Urinate. Now, these are the symptoms related to your location. As the function of the prostate has to do with our sexual function. Obviously, when the prostate is enlarged and doesn't work properly, our sexual function will be impaired, our ability to maintain an erection will be altered, and even our ability to speculate will be altered. But this prostate growth here is mainly due to hormones. In your body, there are hormones, catabolism, that is, hormones that help you destroy tissue, for example, and transform it into energy. And there are also anabolic hormones, which are what lead you to build tissue from the raw material you have in your body. With which, when we have an excessive growth of a tissue, in this case the prostate, we can assume with logic and with scientific evidence that we have a balance of the hormones that these tissues develop. Basically we have a hormonal imbalance. And with regard to the prostate, we always talk about male hormones such as DHT, and the medication currently used is precisely for this hormone, but they can cause this gland to grow other hormones such as prolactin and estrogens, for example, which are hormones that, although they are present in men and women, are more important in women, therefore in men with many estrogens throughout life and low testosterone, which is something more and more frequent nowadays, it is also more and more common, more likely to find an enlarged prostate. In fact, the prostate can grow due to having an excess of hormones that have nothing to do with sexuality. For example, it is the case of insulin, which is another of the anabolic hormones, and obviously the foods that increase these anabolic hormones that can make our prostate grow, like the F1 daughter, that is an anabolic hormone, progesterone or estrogen, to make foods that we should avoid, and the main food that leads to this hormonal increase and that has been linked to prostate growth is milk. But it is by no means the only food that is going to affect your prostate. For example, at the level of hormonal balance, the more body fat we have, the more an enzyme called aromatase that is dedicated to converting male hormones into female ones, we will have more conversion of testosterone into estrogen. We are therefore going to have all the foods that increase my insulin that I have put on weight and that increase my body fat, such as refined carbohydrates or foods with a glycemic index, which I always say that from eating to avoiding they lead me to long-term to worsen these prostate problems. And then, of course, we have foods that directly alter our hormones, such as the consumption of soy or other foods that are generally not organic and that stimulate estrogen, especially since many pesticides in our body of non-organic foods act as estrogens at low doses. These types of substances are known as hormonal disruptors, precisely because they alter our hormonal balance. And what about inflammation? What role does inflammation play in our prostate? The more inflamed a tissue or organ is, the more space it has to occupy. Therefore, the more inflamed a gland like the prostate is, the more sexual and urinary symptoms it will give me. And how do I reduce that inflammation? Not only in my prostate, but in the whole body? There are many ways, and the reality is that inflammation deserves several videos on its own, but the easiest way to do it, which is not a cure for prostate problems, but it will help me reduce symptoms, is to improve my balance of fats. What's that? Many fatty acids are necessary in our body, in its correct balance. If I consume more of one and less of another, I will have a problem. In most people today, there is an imbalance in omega fatty acids. They consume a lot of omega-6 present, for example in vegetable oils such as soybean, canola, corn or sunflower, and little quantity. Omega-3 present seeds in fish or shellfish or in algae. This increased consumption of one and a deficit of another led our body to have a greater tendency to inflammation, something that is valid for all types of inflammation, not only for prostate symptoms, for the symptoms above. Headlines, for example too. So how do we fix it? What do we do to improve it? First of all, avoid the substances that I mentioned that aggravate this hormonal imbalance. We avoid refined grains, foods with a high glycemic index, which are those that trigger our insulin and make us fat, but also make our prostate grow. We avoid hormone disruptors that increase estrogen, such as unfermented soy, processed and plastic packaged foods, or non-organic foods. And third, we avoid dairy if possible. For these reasons, and to mention now, and for the reasons that I mention in the specific dairy video that I leave you in the description in case you want to see it. But what do we have to eat? Effectively. A low glycemic index diet that does not trigger your insulin, that is rich in foods that help me maintain a balance of sex hormones such as cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower or Brussels cabbage, which are rich in a substance called iL-methane nature. This substance helps me regulate estrogen, and then we have another substance that helps reduce the size of the prostate, which is penile fluid, which is a reddish pigment that we can find in many reddish or orange-colored foods of plant origin, such as tomato and carrot or red rest. And I always remember that the consumption of food rich in good foods such as tomatoes, for example, was one of the main recommendations of Lucy Chan, who continues to be the person who holds the world record for life expectancy in men and who died at the 119 years. And what about the supplements that we can use as supplements to help this correct hormonal balance? The reality is that the corrections that have to do with diet, especially if I already have symptoms, unfortunately are not always enough, but it always has to be the first step, because although there are supplements and natural substances that you can use to improve your prostate, if you are putting foods into your system that harm your prostate health all the time, these supplements are not going to help you. What we want at the level of the prostate is basically to block the hormones that cause prostate growth, therefore as herbs that serve as supplements. That it serves for this first in the list, but last in importance. We have nettle. It is a plant that is normally used for hair loss in shampoos, but it has a very important property that is to block the aroma of cup in our body fat. It blocks the transformation of testosterone into estrogen. This is a very important process in overweight men and prostate problems at the same time, because in the long term the increase in estrogen leads me to record the prostate picture. Secondly, we have maca, which has a positive impact on testosterone, not directly, but because it increases your sexual desire, but it also helps prevent that testosterone, also like nettle, from turning into estrogen in our fat. And then we have supplements that prevent the conversion of testosterone into another substance, called DHT. This process happens by an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase, and that is associated on the one hand with prostate growth, but on the other with hair loss. And we have two well-known supplements, the wild palm and the African plum. These two plants have properties that help rebalance testosterone levels with respect to HTP. They help us especially if we have a lot of DHT and low testosterone, but because of its effect on the hair and on the prostate, it has a double benefit because it helps me avoid androgenic hair loss, which is typical of men, of which 3 more in my specific life if you want. But they also help me reduce the symptoms of an enlarged prostate. Now, if you know about this or have done any research before, You've probably read a lot about the hormone DHT, and if you have this problem, you may even be taking DHT blocking medications. The interesting thing is that people with prostate problems work well with DHT blockers both in supplement form to reduce symptoms and in their pharmacological form, but studies in men who received the hormone DHT for 2 years did not show an increase in the prostate or from inflammation. So blocking it from HT works for people who have symptoms, but DHT alone. This hormone by itself is not directly the cause, does not cause prostate growth in people who use this hormone. As you can see, hormonal balance is quite complex, and you still have my specific video on DHT that I am going to leave you in the description. On the other hand, as I mentioned at the beginning, it is estimated that 90% of men over 90 years of age have an enlarged prostate. Find out more at the link in the description.